terms of extractive capitalism, because it goes to the heart of what slave economies was about. With extractive capitalism, he certainly talks a lot about this. There was no investment. There was no investment in infrastructure, technology, agriculture, education, or health. It was about the physical power of the enslaved to do the task that the master wanted. There was no investment was made. So there was no investment in education. So how does that manifest? Well, look, these are some figures of independence. Literacy rates in Britain, 99% of Britain could read and write. Where in the Caribbean, it was 40%. In Africa, it was 40%. Now, some people think those figures are lower or higher. I've seen figures up to 80%. But that no investment in the economy that produced this great wealth was the driving force of the British economy. There was no physical investment. It was just extraction. And you see it there. The same in health. And the health is reflected even to this day. If you look at the deaths per 1,000 live births, these are 22 figures. In Britain, it's three deaths per 1,000. In the Caribbean, it's 15 deaths per 1,000. In Africa, it's 40. So that reflects that lack of investment, that historic lack of investment that produced these education figures and this poor health, which is still manifest to this day, And here's some ideas of how the game was won by Britain, and to a certain extent lost, or Africa had to recover up. You see here, in the 60s, at independence time, the GDP, gross domestic product per capita, in Britain was about $1,500, whereas in Jamaica it was $500. It was almost 3 times higher in Britain. Maybe it was similar in Nigeria and Ghana, it was a little less. Essentially because there was more people there in Nigeria. And if you look even at today, still, that differential in economy, the outlier there is Grenada. Grenada, I was told, maybe you can correct me here, but Grenada is a smaller economy, and they've done more in tourism to get their figure up when you compare it to Jamaica. And as for Nigeria, I'm sure we all know many wealthy Nigerians. That's just the population of Nigeria today is extraordinary. 1 in 4 Africans is a Nigerian, so it's a big economy. It's a very big country. So we look at what extractive capitalism has done. People would argue, well, look, we're investing today. You know, there's aid, there's loans, there's remittances into Africa of like 161 billion, $162 billion. But going out is $203 billion. Tax avoidance, debt payments, resource extraction. You know, one of the figures I like to talk about is about who's the world's greatest exporter of copper? Anyone know this? Switzerland. Yeah, and that's because they moved the way the books are cooked. That the copper from Zambia as a commodity ends up coming out of Switzerland, so they avoid the tax. So there are ways that this money is still productive for the West. That the extractive economy continues. Today, we're looking at $42 billion net gain. $42 billion net gain. So when people talk about we're giving aid, it's get real, you know. But coming back to this extractive capitalism, I've told you the bottom line, the orange line, is the actual population through slavery. You can see that slow growth, that low thing. If there'd been no much higher, we're talking about twice as much. They took the people, you know, so they extracted the one that was about 1.5 billion people, and it's grown. It's one of the youngest. It is the youngest continent. The average age of the youngest. Still got very dynamic and growing economy. If I was a young man again, I'd be there. It's a great place to live. But you can see the effect that the slave trade had on on reducing the growth potential of Africa, and it's still reflected today in economy. So there's a legacy of this extractive capitalism, and it's why the history of slavery matters. We understand that legacy, because if you don't understand the legacy, you can say it's in the past, it doesn't matter. Well, something I use when I do my talks, I always talk about, that was then, this is now. How are we different? How are we different? We know there's this, the legacy exists. How are we different? How are we making things for the better? Because to the enslavers, Britain, Europe, they had an economic advantage. But to, I was going to say us, we the enslaved, there are cultural, societal implications of the slave trade, which we're still suffering from to this day. I'll share them with you. One of them is double consciousness. This is the concept of one judges oneself to the lens, one's own lens as a black person, but also aware of how the white man sees us, or the white person sees us. And that white view is often one of amusement, pity, and contempt. So you're fighting against that. And this is implications for mental health. And so it's a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness. This sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. Looks on in amused contempt and pity. And that's the measure. Now, that's a challenge. This is changing now. I know a lot of my friends fight against this. I know my own mum, she was very aware of this. Was always aware that the measure was white people, so she wanted the best for her children. In terms of the whitest shirt, shiny shoes, that sense of we were always being measured, being looked at. And it's there in that double consciousness. Fast forward almost a century, Paul Gilroy talks about, he says, I want to suggest that Du Bois produced this concept, double consciousness, not just to express the distinctive standpoint of black Americans, but to illuminate the experience of post-slave populations, colonized in general. That sense of the measure, you're being looked at by that white gaze, that double consciousness. But double consciousness, but Du Bois saw us in the African American, Gilroy saw in the African diaspora, and there's a price to pay for that in terms of, and I would argue, a lot of the problems, particularly black men in Britain today with mental health, are suffering from this, challenged, and the way they're looked on by society and to some extent how they see themselves in. So it's a legacy of slavery which is still with us today. So the other one I talk about is this man, Edward Long in his History of Jamaica. Yeah, this is what Peter Fryer talked about this man, Edward Long. He says, the most notorious and influential of 18th century racist writers in Britain, most notorious. The things he said, just outrageous. I'm going to share one with you. This is what he said about blacks. Let me see if the technology is working.
For my own part, I think there are extremely potent reasons for believing that the white and the Negro are two distinct species. Instead of hair, black people have a covering of wool, like the bestial fleas. Their bodies are infested with black lice. Their bestial or fetid smell is so strong that it continues in places where they have been near a quarter of an hour. They have no plan or system of morality. They are barbarous to their children. Black men have no taste but for women, and eating and drinking to excess, no wish but to be idle. In Africa their roads are mere sheep paths, twice as long as they need be, and almost impassable. All authors say that blacks are the vilest of the humankind.
You can see what Peter Fryer is saying about this man. But it goes further. He took ideas from the Spanish, the so-called hierarchy of color, and he talked about the white man as a Negro, with a Negro woman produces a mulatto, a Torrento, a Quatrano, and a Quatrino. And what's interesting, he believed that you could come back to being white through this change. And it's the same man who argued that the Negro is a different species. So it's just complete nonsense. And then he's got all these different retrograde versions of black people. And that's straight out of the Spanish Casta cookbook. Straight out the Spanish Casta society, where that they had that a Spanish man married an Indian who produces a mestizo, and a Spanish and a mestizo with a castizo, and so on. And finally, a castizo and a Spanish produces Spanish, so you're back to the Spanish again. You do it in 3 generations as opposed to 5 here. This is complete nonsense. And they just, by the way, you see Mexico there. Mexico's there. The Spaniard and the Indian, the mestizo. That's how they see themselves, the Mexicans. And that, because black people don't fit into this, because a Spaniard and a black person as a slave, that produces a mulatto, and there's no impact for the mulatto line to come back to being a Spanish. But that casta, that color legacy is with us today. You know, this is what young Lucian there talks about. She talks about the plantation economy, where the black women labored, brown women served, white women consumed. There's a hierarchy. I'm going to just play a little bit of a song. Some of you may know it, but I think it's worth listening to. I think
it's this little song that I'm singing about, people you know is true. If you black gotta work for a living now, this is what they were saying to you. Said if you was white, you're alright. If you was brown, stay around. But as you black, oh brother, get back, get back.
You know, that is with us to this day. And okay, they both gone, but Stuart Hall, the great cultural scientist, his mother, or his brother, his sister wanted to marry a black man, a dark-skinned man, and his mother wouldn't let her, and she committed suicide. Such was the fact that his mother, Malcolm X's mother, was shocked to find that Malcolm X, did I say Malcolm? I didn't say Malcolm X, I said Michael X, our own, when I say our own, Malcolm X. Michael X was a very complex character, but a black leader here in Britain. And he was quite light, I hate saying light skin. His mother was angry that he married a black woman. That this is systemic even to this day amongst us in this room. You know who you are. You look at people through the lens of the hierarchy of colour. Even my own mother, you know, that sense of worth. It's just, and that comes back to Long, taken from the Spanish. So you know, this cultural heritage, the double consciousness and colorism, it's with us, and it's something I'm almost lecturing that we need to deal with and understand, and has an effect on our lives, our families, our well-being. So we look at the other side of this equation, this legacy, the economic legacy. You know, they did well. 1833, when the slave trade was abolished, the slavery compensation was £20 million, 40,000 million, almost 40% of the national budget, and it wasn't paid out until 2015. And some of you may know this tweet. They sent out this tweet which was deleted within hours. Because it said, what was it? Here's today's surprising flagging fact: millions of you helped end the slave trade through your taxes. And there's a British trope in that. Because some of my American friends think that Britain abolished slavery. And they go, oh, Britain is good because it did it. You know, the narrative gets twisted here and twisted. They did take it down. But look at these are some of the immediate benefits that they have, that exist to this day from slavery. Clear the relation to slavery that the National Gallery, Tate Britain, British Museum, even the church, they all have a link, a relationship to slavery. And what's interesting, since George Floyd, they talk about it. Some talk, some do something. And I want to share you with one company that did do something. This was Lloyd's of London. They did something. Now, my introduction with Lloyd's was this. I said this was the 1619 project. How many people know the 1619 project? Yeah. Okay, your homework. This is your homework. 16. Google it. It's podcast. It's a brilliant podcast. Nicola Hammond Jones is just brilliant. It looks at that's when slaves first came to America. The history, 1619 project. Really, really fun. And in a day, it talks about that the majority of credit powering the American slave economy came from the London market years after abolishing the African trade in 1807. So they abolished the trade, but they continued to deal. And there were slave mortgages, because slaves were the most expensive, the most richest thing in America in terms of you could bundle your slaves and mortgage them. They were worth more than the land, the railways, the property. Slaves were a truly negotiable commodity, and they were dealt here in the London market in Lloyd's. Lloyd's which started in the coffee shops of London, and they created this man, Julius Angerstein. He created instruments that allowed people to invest with confidence in that slave trade, because that transatlantic slave trade would take sometimes up to 18 months, 2 years. So your money was at risk for almost 2 years, and you know that's where the expression "when your boat comes in," literally, the boat comes in, your money comes in, and your investment can be returned. He created the instruments to allow us to make this work. And here's an example of a risk book that the insurers would use. This is Horatio Clackett. This is the book. You can see them writing in the trade books in the coffee shops here. And I'll show you a page from it here. Here's a page. If you look at this line here, this is the Odiatic from Corfu to London. And the figure there, 2%, that was the cost of insuring. That was his percentage that he wanted to insure that trade. And in this ship's going literally all over the Atlantic, the North Sea, the Irish Sea, and in there's a ship going from Africa to Barbados. Africa to Barbados. And it doesn't actually say what it carries, but we can see from the risk, 15% of the value of the ship was the investment in was the cost of insuring that trip. Interestingly enough, they found that I'll ask you a question. Which thing would be more expensive to insure? A ship full of men or a ship full of women? Women. Yeah, the women were the most violent. They were the most violent. There was more riots. So there was more cost in transporting women. And it was a business, so and that was reflected in the costs. Now this slide here is letting me down now, because the answer's there. Because what I wanted to show was which one of these is the queen. Well, the clues are there. You can see it made ordinary people very wealthy who could look like the queen. Well, that's Mrs. Oswald. She inherited, her father was a slave who owned a plantation, and she inherited the plantation. She married a slave owner. So she was a very wealthy person, So much so, she could look like a queen. So these, if you come on my tours in the National Gallery, which is the number I'm doing this year, these are hung together. And you can see, if you didn't know, you would assume they were both equally wealthy people. Look at all the queens, both the queens. So you can see the money created great wealth and status and the elites and a middle class upbringing. That's what we have today. So there we have it. We have that lack of infrastructure, technology, and education and health created different results for the enslaved. They benefited from the enslavers in Britain, whereas the enslaved they suffered. And I would argue we suffered to this day for it. You know, Hillary that was talked about, he talked about this in one line here, 20 million people, 200 years of unpaid labor. And he talks about it being a crime because they stole that labor. And this was, when the compensation bill, the compensation bill was going through, that was one of the arguments they put forward. This is a crime. You know, the clerks and other abolitionists, they tried to create a crime, but no, it wasn't a crime. Because remember, the slaves got no compensation at all. In fact, some of them were made to pay for their fee because the fee was £50 for a slave, and it was £100, but we'll give you £50 in cash, and then you get the £50 from the slave. He can work that for you. It didn't quite work out. But there's that extractive capitalism in action there. The fact that they stole that capital and it should be paid for. And Malcolm X puts it beautifully. He puts it very elegantly. He talks about, if you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, no progress. If you pull it out all the way, that's still not progress. Progress is healing the wound the blow made. Healing the blow the wound made. And it's the healing that, if you look at using this as an analogy for reparation. Reparation is about healing. This is why the history of slavery matters, because that legacy. We want to do some healing. If we, I'll come back to that in a moment, are serious, then we need to do something. Now, Lloyd's, I'll put it to you, did do something. They wrote those an apology, they apologized formally. They played a significant role in enabling the transatlantic slave trade and the colony, forming part of a sophisticated network of financial interest activities that made these activities possible. When they talk about sophisticated network, it was really truly global in terms of Europe to Africa, to the Americas. There was a way on one risk book, how the money moved about, how the risk was managed almost across continents. And they committed £52 million for a program of initiatives, 12 million for the EDI program, and 40 million was invested in African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. Now, when you look at that 52 million, it sounds a lot. But you know, when you're making profits of 5.9 billion, there's a certain mismatch. This is what the Telegraph says. Lloyd's of London to pay 52 million over historical slave rings. Whereas the Guardian put it a slightly different way. Lloyd's of London accused of reparations washing over response to the slave trade. Reparations washing. Is that 52 million against a profit of 59 million? Is that right? But let me look a different way. I would argue that it's not about the money. It's about the dialogue. It's about the discussion. It's about the inclusion. It's creating we. It's not Lloyd's giving it to you. We're going to stick. We are part of the same society, part of the same community. So we should work together and understand what reparations would be. Now, it may be that reparations will be done very differently. They could be in schools, could be in education, but having a dialogue, rather than say, here's a shed load of money, get on with it. We've done our bit and walked away. I think that's it's not about creating a community and coming back to that was then, this is now. You know, it's got to be deeper than that. For me, it's about, and this is Hilary Beckles words. It's about a conversation. You know, it's about we are working together. Now you're going to say that sounds fanciful, Michael, but unless we do, we're still going to continue to talk about us, them, you, as opposed to us working together and trying to do the right things, trying to write it, and that's why I think that's why history matters, understanding that, going on that journey, having that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Such a powerful We're living in very interesting times. I'm grateful, which sounds a bit selfish, that I became aware of a lot of what was covered today in the 80s and the 90s, because I felt there was hope. I felt there was a chance that things would change. So the climate has changed, and I'm feeling the chill, and I'm feeling the pushback. What I'd like to ask our speaker is, we have a lot of young people here, which is really good to see. What would you advise our young people to do to resist this pushback, which is not just coming very slowly? I feel it's coming in waves, and the temperature is freezing. What would you suggest? What would you say to a young 16-year-old choosing their A-levels, 18-year-old choosing their degrees, a 21-year-old to go to further studies? What would you suggest they do to resist that pushback? Because I feel I'm too old to keep pushing.
It's a great question. I do my passion is the Black presence in the Renaissance Europe. I mean, you might say that's a pretty tedious subject, but I love it because we were there unpicking and finding out things really important. And I argue with, I'm going to be honest with you, I argue with some academics who write who do work on Black studies in a detailed way. Often, I would argue, inaccessible in the language and approach and words and narrative and style. That is important, but it doesn't help for me, because one of my constituents I talk about and think about is the Black kid leaving care and giving money and going to live in a home, and they're going to be visited by a care worker every so often. They're on their own in the world. How they feel about themselves with this pushback going on. For me, the important thing is they need to know who they are. They need to, and I was fortunate, my mom, my family taught me who I was as a Black person, how I fitted in. I am here. Let me make it personal now. When I go to Nigeria, I'm called an Igbo. That's a white man, even though my name is Ogajuri, a white man. When I go to the Caribbean, and my grandfather was from Barbados, I'm called a European, an Englishman. I am here. So I know why I'm here, I know who I am. You know, I'm lecturing now, but Stuart Hall talks about when you ask someone they come from, you get an essay. Well, on my mother's side, her father came from Barbados, but her mother came from her grandfather came from Ireland, and so on. That sense of, for me, I would encourage them to know who they are. Whatever what that means, know who you are. So no one can take that away from you. You don't have a right to be here. You were born here, you know who you are. It's the person who's challenging you. They need to get over it. They need to be educated. So it's their problem, not your problem. So for me, just, and this is an aggressive way, but arm yourself with your history. Know who you are. Know your family history. Know your Black history. That gives you the strength to be who you are. And I can challenge these people who think I'm an Igbo when I go to Nigerian sessions. They think, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
How are you supposed to have we and the answer that was given the far right movement and the nationalist parade that took place?
Really important. Our conversations, I think it's really important because it's about looking at a legacy, looking at the future, not looking at the here and now, which I think is important. I think if we look at the here and now, it kind of finishes. I think if we look at the we, the us, the our and ours in a conversation which will be continued even when we're gone, because I think if we just think about the here and now, it will be kaput. If we continue and have a conversation, conversations don't stop. So I think that's really important that you ended it there, but I wish you were able to kind of put a bit of cream, the icing on the bun. I think it's a good thing the way you ended it, for us to continue and not for you to just feed us with the information. I think when we leave this room, we can continue this conversation about the we and the us, because we are a part of the society. We're human beings. We are a part of the history that's made the country the way it is. And as you said just now, we belong. So I do actually say I belong, I'm here. This is my country. And I don't care whether, even if I wasn't born here, this is my country. And if I put my foot on this soil, it is mine. And just like they came and put their feet on our soil and said it was theirs and took us, etc. So I think it is important that we continue the conversation, and we are proud. I'm proud to be British. And I do go through this, oh, but my mom said that she's part Indian, Pakistan, and Jamaican, and oh, but my grandma's born in Cuba. I'm like, yeah, but I'm black and British, I'm here. So it is important. Thank you.
So let's talk about the ending. I'm obsessed with the Billy Beth was talking about the conversation, because there's no perfect reparation. 200 million lives, 200 years, 20 million lives. How can you pay for that? Let's have a conversation, let's have a chat, let's discuss it, and then I'll take many different forms with many different people. But let's recognize it.
What I would like to say, you mentioned about the colorism. What we need to remember, it was brainwash into our heads, and whenever we hear about it, we should know where it's coming from. When we were in Africa, we had no colorism problem. So that was instilled in our heads, and then it was also where people who of a lighter colour were given more privilege, so it all started from there. So that is what we need to realise and have in our head. It was taught to us. It wasn't something that we created and have in our head. It came to us from the enslavers and the racist people. And when you play the video talking about whatever that Spanish man was talking about, smell of people, well, they need to remember they didn't use to bath in Europe, so they had smell. So let's remember things where it starts and where it comes from. Thank you.
Hi Michael, thank you very much for such an insightful talk. I really enjoyed it actually, and I learned some really new things from it. My question is around the double consciousness point that you made, and I guess that double consciousness manifests in feelings of being anti-black within the community, but also around alien self-disorder that we see predominantly in psychology. And I guess what I wanted to understand is, this anti-blackness is taught to future generations. It was taught and it's manifested from our parents, and it goes through the generations. And I'm interested in what you think about how us as a community can actually collectively know or figure out ways to address the anti-blackness, to ensure that we do not have a double consciousness and we actually support each other, rather than what we see as this fractured community, essentially coming from this.
Thank you for that question. I think my grandchildren, my grandchildren, great nieces, they don't have any double consciousness. They are themselves. They really are. I'm thinking of my nieces, great nieces. They're not. As my mum talks, it go along to get on, to fit in, do what's necessary to progress. You take some of the microaggressions, but there's a generation now who don't take that. And they've been taught that by dare I say, they're talking about, well, look at my mum, definitely having gave me a bit of it. But I think my son and my son's children, I think it's gone all together. And the way I said it with some confidence, I look at, I'm a great believer in art being, artists are shaman, they predict the future. If you look at a lot of black art today, it owns white art, it takes it on and does something, it owns it in terms of it makes it its own. That sense of I'm not gonna continue the, I'm not gonna be the subservient person, I'm gonna own you in the sense I'm gonna be your equal. So when you look at art, I'm going to share some examples there, you can see how artists, particularly Bema Himmed or Phoebe Russell, they've taken so-called European ideas and made them African or black, made themselves, and that sense of ownership rather than a sense of being reverential, being honouring, that my generation or my mom's generation would be respectful. So I'd say it's moved on now, the double consciousness. And when you talk to Paul Gilroy, he talks about that black Atlantic, that is kind of almost disappearing now. It's almost gone into a different age. And that's reflected in the mix on the street now, in terms of, if you look at black people, I'm sure in this audience, there's people from all over Africa. When I was coming in the 40s, 50s, 60s, it was predominantly West Africa and the Caribbean, colonial, and it's moved on now. So I would argue very strongly that children today don't take any prisoners. In some ways, they're too arrogant. You know, because we talk about, I work with young boys, and we talk about there's a difference between confidence and arrogance. You know, the confidence is what you want. They are arrogant. Whereas with double consciousness, you would be humble. You were the other side of confidence. So now I think we've moved on now. And I think, particularly when I look at my great nieces and nephews, they are their own people. They don't take any prisoners, not like me.
Can we add to that, please? The lady down here who asked the question, what can we actually contribute to the young people in the audience? And your reply was know who you are.
Yeah.
I think that's the same question, answer for your young people.
I don't necessarily actually agree with what you're saying.
Okay.
I think my question is how as a community can we mobilise to address, and I'm a young person, and I'm very aware that anti-blackness actually is still very rampant in our community. And I think the question is more, what is the collective action we can do as a community to actually address this, rather than just reflecting and saying, oh, well, we know ourselves, because what we know has come from a previous generation who have also internalized anti-blackness. So it's not something that's necessarily.
I haven't finished what I was trying to say actually. So what I was
I've got
trying
the
to say
mic
is
right
to
there.
continue. It has to continue and continue and
Just me,
continue.
you know that
I
yes, she's
used
gonna
to
chat.
have to go
Sarah,
to
Yeah,
training
you know, yeah, that's chat. You know how she is.
And at the end of the day, that's what it was called
Okay.
back then.
She's gonna speak.
The changes it's made now is fine, but it has to continue and continue in every part of our community. That's what I was going to say.
Okay, we've got the mic here. Please go ahead. We've only got about 5 more minutes. So.
Yeah, greetings. First of all, thank you for the presentation. Very important topic, and the room is packed. The first thing I'll just give thanks to the question from my young sister is organisation. So join one if you're not with already, and for young people I recommend the Umoja Project. They are powerful in what they're doing. They just done an event on decolonising carnival, and they're very much, as we say, thinking about the mind. But my question is really around, and again, thank you so much for the presentation, is around the we and the us and the our and the ours. Because when those that reflect on many of our great scholars, activists, some you brought up there, one prominent is Dr. Frances Cress Welsing and the ISIS papers, and when she speaks about the colour confrontation and the fact that, you know, the real issue of racism, white supremacy is the fact that there is a fear of genetic annihilation. The fact that they are less than 7% of the population, and the fact that when a child of European white heritage is born, there's at least 1 to 2 white people who are dying. So they are decreasing in numbers. But putting that aside, it's about the mind, because we have people that look like us who still carry out their works of keeping us thinking that we're inferior and that we are a minority, which is a joke. So I'm really mindful of the fact that weekends ago, we had not the reparations march, we had the nationalist parade, or, you know, we had Charlie Kirk and his killer being someone which I understand is part of the Grigos group, which is trying to put away those who are soft right-wing, you know, in Charlie Kirk, and really push for right-wing. And we've seen the right-wing movement, if you want to call it the right-wing movement. And so I'm mindful of linking to my young sister's question, how we're supposed to, and a conversation, we've been having conversations for a very, very long time. Action is something which we like for those that are very much part of the nation building and community healing of our community. So how is it that we're supposed to have a conversation and then maybe action with a we and an us and an our and an ours? If we're talking about all of us, kumbaya, and then with regards to those who are nationalists, paraded, Nigel Farage, Donald Trump, those types of, how do we have that conversation, given what I said about the color confrontation and the fear that is real, which they are decreasing in population. Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. If you could answer that, please.
That's a rich question, and it implies that we should respond to these people.
No, I don't want to center them ever. I'm even talking about just us, but I know the we and us means all.
I go back to, I explained to the sister the other day, I'm a great believer in knowing yourself, the inner man, the man in the mirror, the woman in the mirror, so you know who you are, so that people around you can say what they like, you know who you are, you have that strength of character. And as a community, it's spreading that. And I try and do work in schools to encourage people to be the best they can be. And that's all I can do as one person. Just spread the love around me. Spread the goodnesses I see in life. I think that's important. I can do. And I would encourage others to do it. I'm not a revolutionary. I'm not back to Africa and burn the house down. You know, I'm working with people. I want to be we. That's smart. Yours may be different, but that's the approach I'm taking. Working with who I've got, the people around me. If I go a bit further, let me go a bit further, get a bit further. I'm going to be personal here. This Trump thing really freaks me out.
No, I love it.
No,
let them expose themselves.
Bear with me. This march, what the heck? But then you have to say, look, how can you affect it? The only way I believe you can affect it now is love the ones you're with. The people around you, be the best for them. And take it from there. You know, I can't change what Tommy, whatever his name is, or Trump and his acolytes. I know my people, and I want to love them, help them do the best they can be. That's where I stand on it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynette. Michael knows his own, because I'm in his fabulous book. I just want to ask a question around this. So if you don't know, and that's how I got to know Michael actually. He approached me because he's written this book about John Blank, who was Henry VIII's trumpeter. And how I wish, as a student who loved history, and nearly shrunk under the table when I saw that at school, being of Jamaican heritage, born here. I'm English, by the way, I'm not British. I'm English, that's all right. I have to say that to people because they say, but I'm all right to say I'm English, I was born here. And I wonder a few questions. So, is there something, no, well, I'll keep it short, but for me, this was such an eye-opener in terms of, and that's why I got involved. I was excited to uncover a narrative, a story that perhaps wasn't amplified enough and can make us view things very differently about our place here, but also, we're talking it's a Caribbean event, and statistically,
and I'm sure you've heard the statistics, we are very welcoming people, and we're made up of many different people. But apparently, statistically, in a few years, as Caribbean people, we're not going to exist. I don't know, according to statistics in this country. So I just wanted to put that out there in thoughts around statistically and historically as well. There has been a dip with the population and so on. So statistically, but also, what are you excited about in terms of history that maybe hasn't been uncovered? And we're calling it Black today because I'm old enough to know we go for different names. And I want to say one last thing. This word community is used a lot. I often sit there and wonder what does that mean as well, because we're very varied people and we are members of lots of different communities. So lots of things for you to kind of respond to, choose whatever you want to. But it's a fantastic book if you haven't got it.
Well, thank you for the kind words on the book, because the book really goes to the heart of who I am, in terms of, it's about imagination, because a lot of people can't imagine a Black Tudor. So the book was kind of to enlighten a Black Tudor. Now I forgot what the question.
I was saying, is that, all right, let's pick the one with history. Is there something from the Caribbean, like historically or from that period, that you think actually this is another story that you would like to share? Because the John Blank one.
Oh, you said, I didn't give you that question, did I?
No, but you didn't
Let
ask.
me tell you, okay, you lock the door. Listen, who's heard of Francis Williams?
No.
Francis, you got.
Self-educated.
No, Francis Williams, where do I begin? My first degree was physics, yeah. And there's a picture of him in the V&A, and he's got a library. There's a black guy in a library, and he's looking at a book. And there's a picture. There's a window behind him. Out of the window, it's Halley's Comet passing the sun. And he's pointing at Newton's Principia that predicted, did the maths to predict what was out the window. Francis Williams was one of the few people on the planet who, at that time, with the maths that could understand what was going on. He was a polymath. If you look at his library, there was Latin, Greek, he had Johnson's dictionary there. He was educated in Britain. In fact, he was in Cambridge, and he was put forward for being on the Royal Academy, not the Royal Academy, the Royal Society. Newton was the president. Halley was the assistant, vice president. They rejected him because he was black. So here he is now, he's one of the few people on the planet, but it's not a great picture, but it's Francis Williams. And a thing that really I find captivating about him, because Einstein's theory of general relativity was proved by light passing around the sun, Mercury. So what he was doing was the equivalent of proving a fundamental law of nature from Newton, his gravitational law, that in the same way that general relativity was done at the turn of the last century. Fundamental science. Here was a black man proving fundamental science from the period, but he was rejected. And the thing I found really exquisite about him, he was a slave owner. His dad owned slaves. So I really urge you, check. I've got some pictures. Francis Williams, there's a brilliant YouTube video on Professor Frown, his name's gone. He takes you through it. That's the next person I want to study, because he's just fantastic. He's a scientist, and God knows we need more scientists in the world. Enough of these artists.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry. We're going to have to.
Okay.
I know there are loads more questions, but we're going to have to close there to allow people to go to the closing ceremony of the Caribbean Social Forum. So I'm so sorry, but please do join me in thanking Michael for a fantastic presentation.